Pokemon-themed Linux rootkits are observed, but they're not related to Pokemon Go. Trojans continue to herd IoT botnets. Social media monitoring leads to convictions of jihadist plotters in Australia and the UK. Pegasus spyware and NSO Group's price list. Election hacking on 4 continents. Are the shadow brokers engaged in intelligence or influence operations? In any case, no one's really bidding on the Equation Group code the brokers say they're auctioning. The FBI releases information on its investigation into former Secretary of State Clinton's email, and for a while it looked like cyber high noon at the G20 talks. Time to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, Recorded Future. If you haven't already done so, take a look at Recorded Future's Cyber Daily. We look at it. The CyberWire staff subscribes and consults it daily. The web is rich with indicators and warnings, but it's nearly impossible to collect them by eyeballing the internet by yourself, no matter how many analysts you might have on staff. And we're betting that however many you haven't got enough. Recorded Future does the hard work for you by automatically collecting and organizing the entire web to identify new vulnerabilities and emerging threat indicators. Sign up for the Cyber Daily email to get the top trending technical indicators crossing the web: cyber news, targeted industries, threat actors, exploited vulnerabilities, malware, and suspicious IP addresses. Subscribe today and stay ahead of the cyber attacks. Go to recordedfuture.com/intel to subscribe for free threat intelligence updates from Recorded Future. That's recordedfuture.com/intel. And we thank Recorded Future for sponsoring our show. I'm Dave Bittner in Baltimore with your CyberWire summary for Tuesday, September 6, 2016. Over the long weekend, Trend Micro researchers report finding a Pokemon-themed Linux rootkit called Umbreon after a dark Pokemon that hides in the night. The rootkit has a second Pokemon-themed component named after a big-eared Espeon that backdoors infected systems. Umbreon hides its outbound traffic from the commonly used TCP dump utility. Malware Must Die describes another strain of Linux malware, this one a Trojan called Mirai, an evolution of Bashlight, the IoT botnet herder recently described by Level 3. Mirai targets IoT devices running BusyBox. Reports of social media-enabled jihadist recruiting and inspiration continue. Malaysian security authorities are monitoring the activity of an operator they characterize as an Indonesian operating from Syria. He's active on social media, encouraging sympathizers in Malaysia to undertake terrorist attacks in that country. In Australia, a teenager has been sentenced to 10 years for plotting the murder and beheading of police officers during Anzac Day commemorations. 19-year-old Sept Ramadan Bezim, a resident of suburban Melbourne, was convicted of the thwarted plot. He was in regular online contact with a 14-year-old in Manchester, England, who last October was sentenced to 5 years for inciting terrorism abroad. The discovery of Pegasus spyware on an Emirati activist iPhone and Apple's subsequent patching of the Trident 0 days in both iOS and more recently OS X continues to excite comment. According to the New York Times, NSO Group's price list for lawful intercept services runs to an initial setup fee of $500,000, with installation fees varying by number and kind of devices to be monitored. $650,000 will put the tools into 10 iPhones or Android devices. $500,000 will get them onto 5 BlackBerries, and $300,000 will provide access to 5 Symbian phones. 10 additional targets, the Times reports, can be added for an additional $150,000, 20 for $250,000, 50 for $500,000, and an even 100 additional devices will set the customer back $800,000. The pricing suggests that the spyware would be used as expected for targeted interception of communications as opposed to bulk collection and surveillance. Industry sources draw this lesson from the incident. Watch the traffic emerging from your devices. Plixer's founder and CEO Michael Patterson shared his assessment with the CyberWire. Quote, "There can be a significant gap between vulnerabilities going live in the wild and their discovery and subsequent remediation, as there seems to have been in this case. During this vulnerability time and on an ongoing basis, organizations can protect themselves by watching for anomalies like strange outbound connections. Education becomes more important than ever, helping people recognize strange messages and avoid opening links if they seem out of the norm." End quote. Other governments are found to be engaged in close monitoring of their citizens' networks. Cuba, for one, according to Reuters, is filtering mobile text messages for the appearance of certain keywords, democracy and human rights prominent among them, and then blocking the traffic. The internet in that country continues to be tightly controlled, with home access, licensed by the government, closely restricted to about 5% of the population. Late Friday afternoon, the FBI released emails and other details from its investigation of former Secretary of State Clinton's handling of classified information. It appears that parties unknown engaged in spear phishing against users of the former secretary's homebrew server. The report also indicates that in 2013, an unknown user wandered through an account belonging to a staffer working for then-Secretary Clinton's husband, former President Bill Clinton. The investigation also determined that some 8 mobile devices used by the former secretary to access ClintonEmail.com during her tenure in office could not be located or inspected. Politically motivated hacking, apparently interested in gathering either electoral intelligence, influencing voter sentiment, or directly manipulating results, continued over the weekend. FireEye tracked APT3, a Chinese cyber espionage group, in the networks of at least 2 unnamed Hong Kong agencies in the week prior to this past Sunday's elections in that city. There are also allegations of election hacking in Mexico. Those come from the now-imprisoned Colombian hacker Andres Sepulveda, who says he engaged in hacking, spying, and social media manipulation on behalf of Enrique Peña Nieto's 2012 presidential campaign. Telesur reports that Mexican authorities declined to investigate what they characterize as a frivolous complaint. Elsewhere, Threat Connect found that the same IP address implicated in intrusions into U.S. state voter databases was also used in incursions into German, Turkish, and Ukrainian political networks. Suspicion in all these cases continues to be directed toward Russian intelligence services. The biggest of these hacks, of course, remain the incursions into U.S. political party and campaign networks, as well as the compromise of Equation Group code claimed by the shadow brokers. The shadow brokers, who've offered what they call Equation Group attack code in an online auction, are believed by most observers to be sock puppets for either the FSB or the GRU. There are some observers who think this unlikely. Why, they ask, would an intelligence service so readily reveal its successful collection of an adversary's code? Wouldn't they be more likely to exploit it quietly and keep their sources and methods to themselves? Thus, NSA watcher James Bamford and some others conclude that the shadow brokers are hacktivists abetted by insiders. Such an evaluation would be consistent with an ordinary case of collection, but not if the breach is an influence operation. Sometimes attacks are deliberately noisy, particularly if they aim at deterrence or shaping public opinion, as opposed to intelligence. In any case, the shadow brokers don't seem particularly successful or even active as straight-up criminals. Our partners at Terbium Labs tells us there's not much action in the dark web or elsewhere in the shadow brokers' auction for Equation Group. As far as we can see, the bidding is apparently stalled at just 1.8 Bitcoin, a little more than $1,000, far short of the $500 million the hackers asked for. Some bidders are including rickrolling with their lowball bids. Presidents Obama and Putin exchanged starchy words over cyberwar at the G20 summit. Mr. Obama advised Mr. Putin against turning cyberspace into the wild, wild west, and suggested that if the two countries had to slap virtual leather, Mr. Putin would find himself outgunned. Mr. Putin said, via Sputnik News, that he's got better things to do than fool around with American electoral theater. He went on to deny any involvement in U.S. political hacking, but the Russian president did mention late last week, sounding a little like the man who shot Liberty Valance, that whoever hacked the Democratic National Committee had performed a public service. In any case, Agents James T. West and Artemis Gordon, we hope your private Pullman car has good connectivity. President Grant, we mean President Obama, might want to be in touch. We've got another message from our sponsor, Recorded Future. What are you doing the first week in October? If you're a threat intelligence enthusiast, consider joining Recorded Future for Our Fun 2016 in Washington, D.C. on October 5th and 6th. This year's annual conference promises to be at least as good as the last four. After all, it's organized by Recorded Future, the people who know a thing or two about collection and analysis of the information out there on the web. Recorded Future customers, partners, and threat intelligence enthusiasts are all invited to Our Fun 2016. Meet others like you, people who understand that cybersecurity depends on actionable intelligence. Network with your information security peers to learn how others apply threat intelligence. Our Fun is the place to be if you're a threat intelligence enthusiast. Register now, it's free, at recordedfuture.com/ourfun. That's recordedfuture.com/RFUN. And we thank Recorded Future for sponsoring our show. Joining me is Malek Ben Salem. She's the R&D manager at Accenture Technology Labs. Malek, I know there at Accenture you recently published a framework regarding the security for the industrial Internet of Things. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the industrial Internet of Things, as you know, introduces various operational technology architectures, whether it's healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, or energy production. All of these industries have different architectures. So at Accenture Labs, as we deal with clients from various industries, we developed a framework for security for these industrial Internet of Things domains. And what we focused on is what are the common themes around these architectures and what are the differences between these domains. One thing we looked at is the edge tier, which we think has to be self-organizing and self-reliant. Today we see some solutions, security solutions at the edge, that provide some capabilities, some security functionalities, but there is still a gap in protecting all the devices at the edge. For example, many of these solutions are not vendor agnostic. So when you deploy them, you have to make a lot of customization for that particular industry domain. What we're looking at in our framework is find mechanisms to detect and prevent physical or remote tampering with edge devices, regardless of what the device is. That's one key security capability that we think is important. Another security capability that we looked at also is a distributed intrusion detection mechanism that can optimally assign security functions to the resource-constrained devices at the edge. So some mechanism that augments that edge layer with additional security capabilities, whether it's an additional device that is not constrained in terms of its storage and compute capabilities, or whether it's a gateway at the edge that is responsible for augmenting the security capabilities of the edge devices underneath.
Are we starting to see the development of these sorts of standards with IoT devices, or is it still pretty much the Wild West out there?
I think we're starting to see that, and NIST has a working group that's working on a cybersecurity framework, and they've published several drafts of their framework.
All right, Malek Ben Salem, thanks for joining us. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, along with interviews, our glossary, and more, visit thecyberwire.com. Thanks to all of our sponsors who make the CyberWire possible. The CyberWire podcast is produced by Pratt Street Media. The editor is John Petrick. Our social media editor is Jennifer Iben. And our technical editor is Chris Russell. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie. And I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening.
Wild, Wild West.